So now we get to travel again to a land far, far away. We are traveling to New York.
Yes.
To meet someone very special, an incredible partner, a Kenyan, a podcast supporter, and a podcast maker now, Sandra Macharia, who's the head of the Africa section at the United Nations.
Hi everyone.
Welcome, Sandra.
Hi. How are you?
We're good. Happy Africa Podcast Day.
We're so excited to be here. Thank you so much. You guys look amazing. I was listening a little bit to Brian and Raphael before. This is amazing. The sounds of Nairobi. It's fantastic.
Yes. We're excited as well. And we are so excited about this moment. We get to launch a Pan-African podcast right now, right here on Africa Podcast Day.
Yes. And also, when we are looking at the future of Africa being so bright, first of all, we want to understand, tell us a little bit more about Africa Renewal and the work that you do at the United Nations Office of Global Communications.
Thank you, Josephine and Melissa and everybody else. Just to say again how excited we are to be here as the Africa section, Africa Renewal. And we are a digital magazine. We're a platform, and we are in the United Nations Department of Global Communications in New York, where I'm joining you from right now. And what we do is that we're very much focused on solutions-oriented stories, a very empowering narrative of Africa, and really just talking about showcasing the issues that Africans are dealing with, the solutions that they're coming up with to some of these issues, and generally just promoting a solutions and hopeful narrative of Africa. And we're online, we're on the UN website, we are on social media. And now we're excited to say that we're here launching our Africa Renewal podcast with you.
Okay, so one of the things that we want to talk about a little bit is how has Africa Renewal benefited from starting a podcast? Many people are familiar with the in-depth knowledge that we have about sustainable development in Africa, but many people don't understand why the pivot towards a podcast at this time in our history.
Right, and Josephine, I think that's a very good question. And for us, it seemed to be the next natural evolution. We're a print magazine, and then we've become more digital over time. But it's also a little bit of going back to our roots because it's audio, it's very intimate, and it's a way for us to reach new audiences, more audiences in a very intimate way and very directly on topics that are very pertinent to Africa. For instance, and I understand we'll listen to the episode after this, but our first episode is on the African Continental Free Trade Area, which is creating one African market. That has not happened in the history of this continent. And so to be able to have access to the experts and the people who have been working on this and these kinds of really amazing and transformative initiatives on the continent, and to be able to bring that story to people so that they know more about it, that they can engage with it. And ultimately for us, it's then about how are we really working on a continent where we're addressing issues of poverty, where people are empowered, where we are industrializing. And ultimately, it's about people's lives and being able to have choices to live healthy and happier lives.
Okay, I think we're having a slight delay, but I'm getting what you're saying, Sandra, in terms of creating a different conversation around Africa and continuing to share solutions-oriented stories across the continent. I'd like to ask, what does the theme of the year, Podcasting is Freedom, mean to you?
So podcasting is freedom. And again, I'll go back to what our first episode has been about on the African Continental Free Trade Area, and even a couple of our upcoming episodes around the historic malaria vaccine. These are topics that we chose deliberately around really how do we advance Africa's space, Africa's voice, Africa's agency as African people on the continent who are doing amazing things to free them from poverty, to free themselves from malaria, such a debilitating #1 killer disease on our continent. And so for me, freedom is about what are the stories, what are those options, what is the information that you can access in order to make choices about your life. And because we're really all the same at the end of the day, everybody just wants to have a good life. They want their families to be safe, to be healthy, and to really just get on with a life that is a quality life, and where they can engage with their friends and families and feel safe. And so for us, the idea that podcasting can bring those stories, can bring that information, so people have options and choices. And of course, because they're mobile, you can go with a podcast anywhere. So that, for me, is what podcasting is to me.
Mm-hmm. And can you tell us about the Africa Renewal team? I think a lot of people can appreciate just the diversity of African perspectives on the team that you've brought to the podcast.
So we have a fantastic team at the Africa section in the Department of Global Communications, and of course our partner, the rest of our colleagues in the Department of Global Communications. But specifically in the team, we're made up of, Kenyans, we have a Nigerian, we have a Togolese, we have a Liberians, we have Americans, we have some of our colleagues are Indians as well. And so the idea that, and everyone brings a different perspective and a different reaction to the work that we're doing. And we're just so excited that, and we see it very much as a privilege to be able to be telling these stories, to have a platform like Africa Renewal, which is one that it's a public platform. And we really just want to tell people stories, share information, share stories that are compelling, that are hopeful, that are inspiring, that engage people. And hopefully they feel that they go away from us having learned something, inspired to act or to engage on the topics that we cover.
Yes. That's fantastic. So we are so excited to be able to share the very first episode of the Africa Renewal podcast today on 12th February 2022. And we are going to get into it just now. And we hope that you'll listen to it as much as we have enjoyed being part of this really, really seminal project that has allowed the initiatives that are taking place at the Africa section of the United Nations through the perspectives of experts from across Africa to be known across the world. And for everyone who's listening, you might hear some familiar voices.
Maybe.
Melissa and I are the co-hosts of the podcast episodes. And also, we are so privileged to be part of this experience. So we're going to ask Tevin, who also has been a producer on this project, to take it away and allow us to listen to the episode itself.
Tevin, take it away.
Bonjour. Assalamu alaikum.
Jambo.
Pote.
This podcast is coming to you from the United Nations.
It is about Africa and people who, through their stories and actions, are advancing hope on the continent.
This is the Africa Renewal Podcast. I am Josephine Karienjahi.
I am Melissa Mbugwa.
On this episode,
trade is a means to accelerate the
the attainment of the Africa we want and the attainment of the SDGs.
In this episode, we get to speak to an expert in trade policy who is one of the architects of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement that set the stage for the creation of one African market of 1.2 billion people with a combined GDP of $3 trillion. And why is this important? A United Nations Economic Commission for Africa report shows that in 2018, Africa accounted for only 2.6% of global trade. At the same time, Africa is not trading much with itself, with intra-African exports standing at about 17% of total continental exports. Increasing this share is expected to increase value addition, help create jobs, and boost prosperity on the continent. The creation of the African Continental Free Trade Area stands for a huge diplomatic and political success given the short timeline since the agreement was signed and its entry into force, the ambitious trade liberalization goals set, and the large number of member states who have committed to its implementation. Our guest today is Dr. Joy Kategekwa, and she is the Regional Strategic Advisor to the Assistant Administrator and Director for the Regional Bureau for Africa at the United Nations Development Programme, UNDP. She served as head of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, in Africa, leading delivery of the organization's trade capacity building programs across the continent. She is an international trade and development law and policy specialist and has spent most of the last 2 decades shaping development-friendly trade agreements at both the World Trade Organization and in regional contexts. She is one of the architects of the historic African Continental Free Trade Agreement, having led technical teams in designing its draft legal negotiating instruments.
The Africa Continental Free Trade Area is a flagship project of the African Union's Agenda 2063 and was approved by the African Union's 18th Ordinary Session of the Assembly of Heads of State and Government held in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia, in January 2012, which adopted the decision to establish a continental free trade area. Most importantly, free trading under this new agreement officially began in January of 2021. The aim was to accelerate intra-African trade and boost Africa's trading position in the global market by strengthening Africa's common voice and policy space in global trade negotiations. The African Continental Free Trade Agreement, setting up the Free Trade Area, was signed on March 21, 2018 in Kigali, Rwanda, and came into force on May 30th the following year. The scope of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement includes protocols on the trade in goods, trade in services, rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes, investment, intellectual property rights, competition, digital trade, and women and youth in trade. The Continental Trade Pact's goals include opening up trade in Africa by increasing inter-Africa trade, increasing gross domestic product, which is a measure of the total output and income within an economy, boosting employment and transmitting gains across every strata of the African population, particularly women and youth. The African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat is based in Accra, Ghana, and was inaugurated in August of 2020. We hope that by the end of this episode, we will better understand more about what the African Continental Free Trade Area is and how it affects Africans and different types of businesses.
My name is Joy Kategekwa. I'm a trade and investment lawyer. I work with UNDP, where I advise the senior management on development strategy, development policy, including in the area of the African Continental Free Trade Area. I'm passionate about trade. I believe it can be a lever, it can change the game, it can make things happen on the continent, and to defeat many of those challenges that are still holding the continent back. So I'm very pleased to be here and to engage in this conversation.
How would you describe the African Continental Free Trade Area in your own words?
The African Continental Free Trade Area is a transformative treaty that seeks to accelerate the hopes, the aspirations, the dreams of Africans to defeat the challenge of poverty. It does this by correcting the historical wrong with high tariff structures between and amongst African countries.
So, since the start of trading on January 1st, 2021, there's been a lot of excitement. Could you paint a picture for us so that we can see what is really possible going into further years of this trading?
I think what's really possible is two things. One is that you have a stronger system of readiness in place. Trade agreements are implemented through strong institutional setup. Establishing those committees, establishing those institutional processes, establishing a strong secretariat that can manage the oversight of the preferential treatment that the AFCFTA is about. Finalizing negotiations on critical gateway issues like rules of origin that will help to delineate the scope of what is truly made in Africa. It has also been about preparing those instruments that will accelerate the operationalization around payment systems and so on and so forth. And so you can expect stronger readiness and a flow of goods and services across Africa.
And specifically around women, youth, and small and medium enterprises, what can they expect to characterize their next few years?
You're starting to see the emergence of contours of sectors that are going to be available concretely. Some of these include areas like automotives, areas like lithium-ion batteries, areas like leather and leather products, soya, cocoa, pharmaceutical production type areas, but also areas around financial services and cultural services. So if this is the basket of goods and services that we're seeing as sectors on offer, and this is a result of some of the recent research UNDP and the AFCFTA Secretariat has put out in the Futures Report 2021, it means that women and youth can expect to start to prepare to access markets, to prepare for production in those areas that are emerging. They can expect to start to try to enter, sustain and scale their participation in value chains in some of those areas. They can expect basically to start to see the fruits of the One Africa market if they strategically position for that is what is on offer preferentially. The studies also tell us that there will be a doubling of intra-African trade. They tell us there will be huge savings if we fast-track issues like trade facilitation. They tell us that if governments take a complementary approach to enhance the enabling environments using regulations as a stimulus, that you will see big savings in the billions for business. What they also tell us specifically about women is that there will be an 18% increase in trade in those sectors in which women are most participating. So you have services, you have agro-processing. And so it is for women and youth-owned exporting enterprises to start to position, asking the question, how can I take advantage of that which is on preferential offer in the One African market?
Fantastic. That's a really, really clear breakdown. I'm sure the audience will be taking notes. How did you get involved in creating this historic policy?
Well, it's an interesting story. I'm a trade lawyer. You know, I've spent my entire career working on trade deals. I started out negotiating for my country, Uganda, at the World Trade Organization. I then moved on into different configurations, one of which was as an official at the World Trade Organization Secretariat. And then I also had the privilege to establish the UNCTAD Regional Office for Africa. it was a unique time because when I took up this role, this was mid 2015, in July, there had just been that summit decision to fast track the establishment of the African Continental Free Trade Area. At that time, we used to call it the Continental Free Trade Area, the CFTA. And so it was serendipity that the role I held at the time as the head of the UNCTAD Regional Office for Africa, I think it allowed me to use that space, the institutional strength and capacity of UNCTAD, to help really and support the African Union and their leadership, the Commissioner for Trade, and to work also with partners, ECA and others, to really help transform this political wheel, this political mandate to fast track acceleration of the establishment of the CFTA into technical, workable, legal instruments that can allow you to move from modalities into working documents that have eventually found their expression through a negotiation process in what we now know as the AFCFTA. And so I think looking back, it was the hand of God. It was career choices one made. It was being in the right place at the right time. It was in understanding the value of partnerships. And it was really in maximizing the assets that one had picked up over time, having been supporting negotiators, having been advising African governments on how to do trade deals, having been, supporting from the capacity building angle. All of that sort of came to bear in that position that I held previously that allowed for us to make a contribution in what we now have as the AFCFTA.
It really is a moment that met you. It sounds very timely and also an opportunity for those who are listening who haven't quite gotten a chance to experience the long view of trade and industrialization in Africa to hear from your perspective. And thank you for sharing your initial entry into this space. And it also feels like it's a really critical moment for trade and industrialization in Africa overall. If you look at some of the businesses that have been awarded through the African Continental Free Trade Area Caravan, some of the ventures that they're taking part in are truly transforming what's possible across the continent. And at the World Trade Organization, of course, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, an African woman, is leading. And for us to also now think about how the African Continental Free Trade Area is continuing to become a part of everyone's reality, it truly allows us to reflect on what's possible. How did you feel about being involved in this historic moment as a Ugandan, as an African, as a member of several different communities, and as part of Africans working on the global stage?
People pick careers for different reasons. I think in my case, I was always fascinated at the contradiction between having so much wealth and yet so much poverty. And I always found myself unable to comprehend why it is that we cannot be in control of the destiny, the socioeconomic development of our countries, sitting amidst a lot of wealth. Think about all the African countries, great resources in material wealth, in human capital. And so when I started to make decisions as to which part of the law I would specialize in, I always knew that it was going to be about cracking those problems that make it impossible for us to determine the prices of our commodities, for us to take our commodities from raw material into value-added products, for us to create those industries that can supply the world with high-quality goods. And the branch of trade and investment law took one there. And so many years into starting where the AFCFTA comes into part of the equation, I think lots had been picked up in terms of frustration, but also in terms of deepening knowledge on what to do. And so with all of that, sitting in a place where the brief is to do it for Africa, I think there was a strong sense of duty and responsibility that we have an opportunity now to pick that all which we have seen, that works, that does not work very well, and pull it together to say, how do we adapt it into the context of Africa to accelerate socioeconomic progress, to build on that profile that's already taking place in Africa?
Against a backdrop of the COVID-19 pandemic, a lot of the cross-continental traders have found that their businesses were very heavily impacted, including many of those who've shared their stories over the course of the last few years. So how have you seen the African Continental Free Trade Area, and indeed the businesses that have continued to become involved as cross-border traders, affected by the COVID-19 pandemic?
So there are two angles to that. One is the pattern, the traditional pattern as we know it, the dominant pattern, because if you have 17% intra-African trade, the majority is with the rest of the world. But there's another story, and that's the story that fascinates me, which is that when things are shut down and the need remains, it tells you two things. One is that the capacity of African suppliers, producers, to push and produce for that demand is incredible and is indeed the promise of the AFCFTA when you think about it. It also tells me that there was something wrong with a trade policy that kept that potential locked. And so what the AFCFTA does in a COVID dispensation is create a psychological tipping point that enhances the belief that indeed this can be made in Africa and that there is a market for this when made in Africa. So in some, I think it's a positive story for trade, because while we had a tumbling, I think the numbers from UNCTAD talk about 17% of a tumble in manufacturers. I think we saw a rise in pivoting of domestic production to meet those needs. Now, when that domestic production has gotten a window to showcase what it's capable of doing, when it is complemented by a tariff structure that makes the markets assure a viable export proposition, when it is complemented by a political cloud that is pushing for made in Africa, I think we're on to something different here. It's not going to be automatic. It has to be worked at with intentional focus.
What's in place right now in the various countries for the entrepreneur to start to tap into so that they can set themselves up to begin to enjoy the benefits?
There will be this part around the practicalities of identifying the players. And so it's almost like the key stakeholder, the key interlocutor in this conversation becomes the exporters themselves, understanding who they are, where they are, what they're producing, and what their bottlenecks are. Because that level of precision takes it from treaty text into the third pillar, which is targeted capacity building programs that are linked specifically to the bottlenecks that particular exporters are facing. So when you think about it, when the governments prepare well, they prepare the enabling framework, they prepare the policy framework. They are intentional on supporting the capacity of exporters by creating that space, so to speak. Because typically there you're talking about practicalities around financing, around meeting standards, around packaging, around trade facilitation procedures that fast track their capacity to move, around thinking about whether there is a way to tackle create regimes that speak closer to informality or non-formality, as some would call it. So we have to move from the broader into targeted capacity building programs where the threshold for success is not so much how much did we increase awareness as it is how much did the exports rise.
I think I would really want to know, as Africans all over the world listen in, and also people who are involved in Africa's development, how can we, who are listening to you support the expansion of the African Continental Free Trade Area from an everyday kind of ordinary level?
One is know the opportunity. You can't utilize what you don't know. So know the opportunity. The second one is for exporters to demand the AFCFTA treatment. Because remember, it's preferential treatment. There's a regime ongoing right now, so trade has not stopped. Intra-African trade has not stopped. It would only be accelerated. So demanding that treatment as you cross borders, that is the zero-rated tariffs, as countries have put in their offers, is critical from the accountability side. The third one is for everyday people, yourself and myself, to create the market. Create the market by demanding that with your money you will buy those products, by voting for those products. So when we think about Made in Africa, what are we talking about? We're talking about the goods and services that we consume every day. We're talking about a conscious decision to vote for those products by demanding them when you find a place where they're being sold. That demand must be a demand for quality, a demand for skill, but it must be a demand that chooses them when they're available. Because in that choice is the backstory around pushing the production, around pushing for them to employ more people, around getting feedback to them that they understand that the quality could improve here and there. That is how we make the market happen. And above all, in that choice is the confidence you give to them that their products are worthy and that their products can be utilized. And that is how we start to see that indeed trade is a means to accelerate the attainment of the Africa we want and the attainment of the SDGs.
This episode of the Africa Renewal podcast was produced by the United Nations Department of Global Communications and Africa Podfest.
Follow Africa Renewal on Twitter and Facebook. Check out the show notes for more insight into this topic.
The Africa Renewal podcast provides factual perspectives on economic, social, and development affairs in Africa.
You can find this podcast on Google Podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and wherever you listen to great Africa-focused podcasts.
We are so excited. We are back at
Africa Podcast Day.
And we listened to Dr. Joy Kategekwa. She is a trade expert, and you could just hear it. She's been on the ground making sure that across Africa we can pay and transact business one stop at a time. So we are so excited that this is the first episode that is launching. For many of you, what you might not know is creative businesses have been impacted very, very heavily by the lack of a cross-border trade in Africa. So for us, the African Continental Free Trade Area is game-changing.
It really is game-changing. And what a special opportunity, a special moment to have podcasting as the space that is expanding this conversation that comes from a high-level policy, which often has felt inaccessible to you and I, the traders on the streets, the students, the entrepreneurs in the creative space working right out of Africa. And this is very exciting to us as a demonstration of exactly why we're here, championing more podcasting.
Yes, and for you, Sandra, when you're listening to that podcast, what were your expectations going in as an institution into the podcast creation process, and were they met? And also, what can you tell us about the process of creating podcasts in this time in history?
Right. So first, I just want to thank you for being our production partners and working with us in this process. We're very excited when we had the opportunity to work together on this. And I think indeed our expectations were met in terms of this journey. We really were thinking about what were the kinds of stories that we wanted to tell. Could we tell them compellingly? And being able to find experts and speakers who can speak so passionately about these kinds of topics. And so with Joy, like you said, you can read Dr. Kategekwa, you can really hear in her voice that this is a passion project for her, that this is something that she truly believes in. And so there was also a meeting of the minds there in terms of what we were trying to do with the podcast with you, what Dr. Kategekwa was able to bring to the table as well. And then for us, because I think on the broader scheme of things, in the broader scheme of things, I mean, we're all aspiring to this continent where we take it for granted that we can move around the continent, that we can trade across the continent, that we can meet up with each other, because that really is the dream of the Africa that we want. And in terms of producing a podcast in these times, the fact that we could do it remotely, that was an option that we could co-create, was just amazing. So while, of course, the pandemic has had the impact that it has, the ability for us to be innovative, to be able to do this with you in different countries, in different time zones, has been excellent. It's been fantastic. It's been, of course, it had its challenges from time to time, but I think on the whole, our expectations were met. We're very, very, very grateful to Dr. Kategekwa for being involved in this project. And we just look forward to the next. So onwards and upwards from here.
We're not even on the stream. We can't see ourselves in the stream. We're not in the stream yet.
Response, Sandra. As many of you podcasters can relate, audio and technical hitches do happen, but then with our fantastic team here, we are working hard to resolve that. So thank you, Sandra, for joining us. We have a very, very special point in the program where we've reached. There is no launch without actually launching your podcast. And so here at Studio in Nairobi, we're going to ask our studio audience to cheer as we officially launch the Africa Renewal Podcast.
So, are you ready? 3, 2, 1, just
3,
2.
Okay, the anticipation is building. Everybody's getting ready. Everybody's getting ready for the Africa Renewal Podcast launch. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining us as we launch the Africa Renewal Podcast. You can listen to it on all major podcast platforms. If you just listened to this episode and you want to tell Africa Renewal, the team at the Africa section of the United Nations Department of Global Communications, how you feel about this episode, please go to their Twitter page at Africa Renewal. And we are super excited to be part of this launch and to be part of this production. Thank you.